Hello, Kobo in Conversation listeners. Michael and I are back with another episode in our book talking series, in which we take a step back from actually reading books to talk about the things going on in the book publishing industry. Now, normally the way these go is we skip around to various topics, recent events, just kind of a buffet of book business news. But for this episode, we're going to drill into just one topic, a book called Shy Girl, which you can't buy because the publisher canceled it because, and this is where it gets murky, they believed it was entirely or mostly generated by AI. There's a lot of question marks punctuating that single sentence. But fortunately, Michael's here to walk us through a lot of it. So before we get into it, Michael, why did you want to spend a whole episode on just this topic?
This is a rich, rich topic. We're talking about one book, but at the same time, we're talking about this massive issue that publishing and really the book industry as a whole is facing around what do you do with AI as a publisher? How can you use it as an author? When is it okay? When is it not okay? And we've talked a little bit about this in previous episodes from the point of view of being a retailer. You know, we talk about being on the receiving end of a lot of AI generated content, especially through our self-publishing program, Kobo Writing Life. And, you know, that's really the most active front in this particular battle where lots and lots of people are generating lots and lots of mostly not very good books and then trying to push them into self-publishing. But on the traditional publishing side, we assume that the publisher is acting as a gatekeeper, that they're the ones that are guaranteeing the quality of a book. And so this was the first time that we saw a publisher really have to wrestle with a book where the question became how much of this was written by a person and how much of it was written by a machine.
So Shy Girl, just to catch everybody up, is a femgore book. That's feminist horror, kind of. That's the angle. That's the word in the copy. It was a book that was originally self-published, and was picked up by Hachette, big multinational publisher, to release, as you say, traditionally. Bookstores like us,
Yeah.
To produce an audiobook, to do all that good stuff. What more do we know about this book and its author, Mia Ballard?
Okay, so we go back to February of 2025, which is around when the initial self-publication of this book happens. Self-published on Amazon. Mia Ballard is the author, and it starts to get some traction. Like it's showing up on Goodreads, it's showing up on Book Talk, and as you say, it's like a contemporary psychological horror focused on this character named Gia. She's a woman in her 30s. She's lonely, broken, desperate. And according to the review that came from the bookseller in the UK, she signs herself up for a sugar dating website, encounters the charming and wealthy Nathan, and what begins as a transactional escape soon spirals into a nightmare of captivity and control. And what the author, Ballard, says is, this book is what happens when a woman, long ignored and controlled, turns the violence done to her into something feral and unstoppable. This is a story about the quiet girls, the good girls, the obedient ones who, when pushed too far, become something monstrous, something free. So this is the book that's out there gaining a lot of self-publishing traction, showing, good kind of bestseller rankings on Amazon. And that leads it to get acquired by Hachette. And acquisitions driven by this online buzz, sales, and
this is one of those rare cases that publishers love because, I mean, publishing is a risky business, and there's nothing better than being able to buy a book that already has a market track record.
And this is a trend that we're seeing more often, is acquiring editors looking for new books in self-publishing. The pressure to come up with authors who have either a built-in audience or a track record of sales is getting more and more intense for publishers. And so naturally, they've gone to look at a place where the self-publishing market is a proving ground for let's find an author who we can see because we've got the bestseller rankings right there. This is someone who either has a book that we can acquire or we can commission to do a new one. So Irene Ali in the UK is the original acquiring editor. She buys world rights. And then there's the US editor, Angelica Chong. And Ali is all in on this book. So when it's announced that it's been acquired by Hachette, Ali says, if you're into gory horror and razor-sharp revenge thrillers that keep cranking up the tension, Shy Girl is your next obsession. It's packed with gasp-out-loud moments. It's the kind of book you'll be dying to discuss. It's been such a pleasure to work with Mia on refining her brilliant novel. I couldn't be more excited to welcome her to the Wildfire list. Wildfire is an imprint of Hachette. And it's going to be updated from the self-published version with new never-seen-before chapters, an additional short story, and is going to be published in November. So she loves this book. She says, I've been working with the author on it and polishing up the self-published version to be ready for traditional publishing. And it's going to go out in November of 2025. Published first in the UK.
Yep.
First, initial sales look good. And then this story starts to bubble online. And that's where this whole thing starts to get interesting. Because up until now, this is a very standard publishing story.
And it's on its way to publishing here. This is another thing listeners not steeped in this industry might not realize is not everything comes out at exactly the same time everywhere.
Yeah.
This was so November 2025, as you say, was the original publishing date in the UK. We were going to see it on this side of the ocean in April. It was going to be the big summer read. This is
That's right.
something that Hachette was expecting to be on the must-read summer books lists.
Yep. And retailers are being pitched on it. All the plans are in place. And then late 2025 and into January 2026, there starts to be this like narrative that's showing up online of people saying, hey, I think this book has AI in it. They don't know how much, but it starts to become a bit of a thing. It's showing up on Goodreads. It's in Reddit. There's a viral video on YouTube that gets 1 million views that says this book is AI slop. And there are a bunch of traits in the book that people keep coming back to say, hey, we don't think this was written by a person. There is this like frequent reuse of sentence structures. There are kind of metaphors and emotional beats that keep repeating across scenes in a way that you probably wouldn't do if you were a person. You wouldn't repeat like that.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing your editor would mark and go like, okay, love the recurring motif.
Yeah.
We need to like change it. It needs to evolve through the book. And we can't just keep hitting the same bell.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there are sentences that are grammatically correct, but kind of feel logically off, or like things like images and ideas that don't quite connect. And that idea of near coherence is something that people often flag when they talk about AI text and a bunch of other things. And what happens is that the suspicion becomes viral. And so then you have people on Goodreads testing passages of the book using AI detectors, and people pulling out different instances. Like the viral video I talked about is literally breaking down paragraph by paragraph, line by line, things that the video creator believes are signs of AI. And then once it's been framed that way, then readers are starting to read it that way. And that, then reviews are coming up from that, and that just amplifies everything. So this is cooking through January and February, and somewhere along the line, the New York Times gets involved.
They do indeed. Yeah, I believe it's Alexandra Alter, their publishing industry reporter, picks it up and looks at there was an AI tool in particular. This seems to center on the 78% figure, where a tech founder, somebody with an AI detection tool, came up with this number, and that's kind of everything kind of spools out from this test. people drill into it further. We pull in other comments. There are people who are people already on the record, as you say, the buzz around it was some folks saying, if it's not written by AI, God, you know, I think the author would do well to say AI wrote it because parts of it are bad.
Yeah. So, and there's even controversy around the AI, around the New York Times article. So
Yes.
you have Alexandra Alter, who's picking up on this, and starting to build a story around it. There is some question that whether a publishing expert, Tad McElroy, came to her with the story and
Mm.
said, I've been working with this company called Panagram, who's been doing AI detection. Here's everything that we've seen that shows that this book is AI. Maybe you should look into it. Maybe he was supposed to get a credit in the story. Maybe he wasn't. He
Mm.
ended up with a quote, but Alexandra kind of, framed that as her investigation. We don't know what really happened there, but we do know that you had a couple of AI generation programs, Pangram, not Panagram, Pangram, and two others, GPT-0 and Originality.ai.
These are detection
These are
programs.
detections that New York Times and McElroy and others were using, pushing the text through it to see which passages were likely
Hmm.
AI. And all three of those programs found text that was likely to be largely or partly generated by AI. New York Times goes to Hachette and says, here's what we're seeing. And this story starts to spread through the industry with the result that a day later, March 20th, 2026, Hachette cancels publication, cancels it in the US, pulls it from the UK.
For an April publication date for US and Canada. Yeah. So
Correct.
this
Yeah,
is like books are in boxes on trucks.
absolutely. These have been printed. And then we get into just the kind of the forensic analysis of how did this happen. Hachette makes kind of a brief statement that says, we have commitment to original creative expression, tries to, then, reasonably say as little as possible. And that then gets us into the author response. Mia Ballard denies personally using AI. So she obviously gets asked. She does say that I was working with a freelance editor. It's possible that the freelance editor inserted AI generated material without her knowledge.
Which is a doozy.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
The other issue is, to what degree should Hachette have been supporting their author? Did
Yeah.
they jump away too quickly? Mia
Yeah.
Ballard is a woman of color. Is that a factor? Like there's a lot that ends up cooking around this. There was an editor who, in her public statement says, I've been working with Mia on this book, which means she presumably looked at all of the material that was there and thought it was fine before it got
Mm.
published.
Hmm.
There are so like the questions just start spinning out from here. Mia Ballard is, saying that she's experienced significant reputational and mental health harm from this controversy, which you can imagine. You've essentially,
Hmm.
people have essentially said you didn't write your book, and that's going to be something that is an asterisk next to her name, presumably forever.
Yep.
So the broader implications that come out from this, this is, I think, at least that we know of, the first publishing cancellation that's been tied to AI use coming from the big five publishers. Certainly not the first time a book has been blocked from sale because of AI use. We do that all the time because we get all kinds of crazy stuff sent to us. But for a big five publisher with acquiring editors and editors working on the work with the author, this is the first time something's gotten all the way through the pipeline and basically been on shelves and then got pulled. So now we're starting to look at what's the responsibility of the author? Like what does authorship mean?
Hmm.
There are a whole bunch of things spinning out from this in terms of what disclosures should publishers be asking for from their authors when they submit a work? Um, what's the responsibility of the editor? Should the editor have caught this along the way? And if somebody submits something and they don't say that something has AI in it, what's the liability around that? What are the contractual implications around that? Um, and a lot of this is still up in the air, but we can talk a bit about how some of the stuff seems to be shaking out.
One of the things I found fascinating reading up on this, reading through the New York Times coverage, there was a piece in the Guardian as well, was it wasn't, this may be the first high profile like cancellation of a book that was in flight. But there was a lot of talk from inside the industry. They got some people anonymously on record saying they somebody said that there was a high profile author where they had gone back and said this part of the book's kind of flat. Like, can we work on this? And the author fessed up that it was AI generated. And this is someone with a long-standing relationship with their editor. They've got books in print. They're a success. You if if this is something that's if this is like a foul being committed by authors who have already won, who are already on top of it, um, yeah, you can imagine it's going to be everywhere, and we really do need to solve this problem. So,
Mhm.
I guess what I want to ask you is what are you seeing as a response? Is there any kind of coordinated effort to inform the reader this is or is not AI generated? There's pieces of it. I'm thinking of because we've seen experimentation in this. Of course, Shawn Michaels wrote a book several years ago. I spoke with him on this show. We'll have a link in the show notes called "Do You Remember Being Born?" In which parts were deliberately generated by AI because there's an AI in the book,
Mhm.
and he went and enlisted a robot to go speak for itself, and then wrote his novel around that. So, I guess how is the industry going to even handle this?
Well, you're right. Like this isn't the first time the industry started to grapple with it. Like there's the self-publishing, the indie author side that we've talked about already, but there was the sci-fi magazine Clark's World
Hmm.
that had to close submissions temporarily in 2023 because they were being overwhelmed by AI generated short stories. And so
Yeah,
it was much more of like a process overload. The editors couldn't handle it
yeah.
and they were having to wade through all of this slop. You had the author and publishing expert Jane Friedman had AI generated books with her name on them put into Amazon that were not written by her at all.
Hmm.
So that triggered a whole other debate about what are the platforms responsible for versus what the author's responsible for, and identity fraud in AI. And remember, like the Writers Guild of America strike that put all TV and movies on hiatus in 2023 was really about the limits of AI in script writing.
Hmm.
So like this has been cooking for a while, but this one is a I think a landmark for traditional publishing, and it shows up in a couple of ways. There is the legal implications between
Hmm.
an author and a publisher. And most publishing contracts include some kind of representation that the work is original
Hmm.
and that the author has disclosed any third parties that were involved in writing it. And so if you're a publisher like Hachette and you find out that there's AI generated stuff in there, you could argue that you've had a breach of contract. You've got the
Yeah.
right to terminate or withdraw the book. But we don't really have any firm rules on, does AI assistance count as a third party contribution?
Right, because the third party contribution clause, if I understand it, is kind of a defense. I mean, every general fights the last war, and these clauses have something to do with or have been informed by scandals over the years
Yes.
of involving plagiarism. There's been a bunch. Jonah Lehrer comes to mind, the nonfiction writer, but there have been a bunch of scandals around that. So certainly publishers have had to say like, and you attest that you actually wrote this whole thing. But now we're in a different world, exactly as you say. There's AI assistance is something else.
Yeah. There's always been um a certain amount of flexibility on who the author is, in the sense that there's always been this gray zone. Like you can have a ghostwriter, and
Yeah.
that's acceptable if you, the author, disclose to the publisher, hey, I used a ghostwriter for this. The AI assistants, those disclosures are just starting now to get standardized. One of the things that publishers struggle with is we still don't have a clear sense of whether AI generated text actually gets copy protection.
Hmm.
And that right now is really a jurisdiction by jurisdiction thing. And so if portions of the work are generated by AI and that's considered non-copyrightable, then the publisher may not be able to fully control or monetize the work, which is kind
Right.
of their job. Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that's their whole thing. And they can't, if somebody uses it in a way that the author or the publisher isn't, kind of comfortable with, do they have the same remedies that they would if the author was the one fully writing the book? And so that's another thing that has everybody up in arms on top of just this, like the straight up reputational issues where publishers are thinking about their own brand integrity. They're thinking about people more than ever saying, how can I make sure that I'm going to buy a book that is of good quality? And that's going to become more and more of an issue as more AI stuff shows up. And that may not be a legal argument, but it certainly is something that publishers have in the back of their mind of like, we don't, we don't want to look like we're not doing our job.
Yeah.
So there is that's sort of boiling down to this these series of questions like, is AI a tool or is it part of an author's writing process or is it out of scope entirely? How much disclosure does an author have to give?
Hmm.
And is that enforceable? And then who's accountable when AI sneaks in? Is it the author? Is it the editor? Is it the publisher? Is it like nobody? The and what that's turning into is a whole bunch of changes to how publishers are putting contracts in front of authors and like trying to get assurances from them.
Yeah. As you're talking about this, I'm thinking about Kobo Originals author Anna Gomez, who we had on the show to talk about her road trip romance, in which she spoke quite freely about, and we thought it was fascinating how she, as a plot gridding tool, she used AI because it was
Mhm,
like the character is going to travel by EV, they're going to travel across the United States. Um, I want the route to be reasonably plausible,
mhm.
but I also don't want to become an expert on American road trips. Like that's a
And EV charging stations.
EV charging station. That's like
Yeah.
that's not a that's a week 2 week research project. I'd like to skip, please, because I am a writer of romance novels, and you wonder if you've kind of got to imagine these use cases because the contracts need to be designed such that you're not penalizing writers for like shortcutting, like employing a research assistant who will work on the cheap because nobody's got like this is a constant battle for every kind of author.
And what this seems to be turning into is, what I call the, plutonium or salt test of AI, which is, plutonium deadly in the smallest trace. Any amount of it kills you dead
Yeah,
and will continue to do so for thousands of years. Um, Salt will kill you if there's a lot of it,
yeah,
but in small amounts could be useful, could be
yeah.
tasty, might be helpful. And in different parts of the book and publishing industry, some people believe that AI is plutonium. And I think if you talk to a lot of the
Mm,
author community, they see not only is this a threat to their livelihood, but the use of AI tools is essentially using what they say as the products of theft.
mhm.
And, someone broke into our house and stole all of our furniture and chopped it up and is now selling stuff back to us saying, well, it's not your furniture anymore. It's made out of bits of your furniture, but it doesn't look like the chair that we stole.
You're
So
speaking to the problem of training these LLMs and that they've been
exactly,
trained on copyrighted
exactly.
material in the first place.
Right. And so there is a huge fight around fair use and what does, is training an LLM like reading a book, or is it really like taking someone's asset and sticking it into another asset? And those fights are all in front of the courts right now. But for a lot of the author community, the ground truth for them is these tools are made of our work, and to use those tools is to benefit from the somebody stealing our stuff. And that makes it just beyond the pale for a lot of people, not just as a writing tool, but even as, for us to use as a retailer for recommendations or something like that. Like the idea is, why would you use something that came from people taking our stuff?
Yeah.
So that's the plutonium side. And we have, customers come up and say, we would like you to guarantee that you're not using AI in any part of your operation, which we can't do. Um, but it's coming from that same place. And then on the other side, you have the AI is like salt, where we know that there are not lots of nonfiction authors who are using AI tools now as research assistants, or are using it to collate information that they're going to use when they sit down to write, or create an archive of information that they've gathered that can be queryable so that they can pull
Yeah.
things from it as they need it. Like that's just that's a natural place that we can see authors having gone. And then, like your Anna Gomez example, hey, I need to quickly understand, the structure of, corsets in the 1830s. Tell me all about that, and not have to go to a library and dig it out. Yeah, we can. So as a research assistant, it makes a lot of sense. You can imagine situations where an author is stuck and I'm trying to get this paragraph right and I can't get it. And you take a bunch of that text and you throw it into ChatGPT and say, give me 5 different versions of this. And you read all 5. Maybe you don't like any of them, but it gives you the thing that you need to actually get the, kind of the paragraph that you want. Or you like one of the 5 and you stick it in.
Yeah.
And even, whether it's we as a retailer or as a publisher who's trying to work through a set of submissions, we know that something that's 100% generated by AI is bad, in the sense that, at least for the time being, it's generally of low enough quality that people don't want it. And we know that if an author can guarantee that it's 100% written by a person, that follows the rules that we've always followed. And then there's all of this stuff in the middle. Whether it's as a research assistant, as a copy editing tool, as a, punctuation and grammar checker, all the way to I need help like rephrasing or restructuring this. And that's like somewhere in there is the line where it's salt makes things tasty to salt makes things deadly. And we're all like, all of us are trying to figure out that line. The way that we're having to figure out how to solve it as a retailer from like a kind of detection and screening perspective, because we want to know, like customers, I think, would like to know whether there's a lot of AI in a book. They kind of like a sticker on it, I think.
Mhm.
And there is a whole conversation now going on in the publishing data standards community on how could you label that and what would it look like and how would you transfer it between publishers and retailers. Like that's a conversation that's happening. Nobody, by the way, knows what those labels would look like or what the thresholds would be,
Yeah.
but or at least talking about how you'd move it back and forth. And then where publishers are spending all of their time right now is on the contracts
Right.
and a whole set of new disclosures that are happening. And it's always interesting to look at what tools does a business turn to when they're feeling under threat. And And if you're a publisher, the weapon you always pick up is the contract. Like
It's the
that
contract. Yeah.
in the end, publishing is a business of contracts.
When we were getting started, when ebooks were rising and Kobo had just shown up on the scene, I remember that was a like we had to learn way too much about publishing contracts for a bookseller because our whole business depended on publishers getting the agreements right with authors so that they would be comfortable selling their books digitally and receiving proper remuneration that didn't turn in this new format into this like least profitable great new thing. Like, Stephen King needs to get paid and he wants to get paid no matter
Yeah.
what new medium you got to put his books in. Yeah. And so I guess that's kind of the mark of it, right? Like, is it cataclysmic? Well, are publishers cracking open contracts? They are, then it's cataclysmic.
And it's exactly that threshold in the sense that as much as contracts can be standardized and they're familiar to everyone and everybody knows what they mean, the work is smooth between a publisher and an agent or a publisher and an author. Everybody understands what those terms mean.
Yeah.
As soon as you start to, and they're loath to introduce something new because
Yeah.
then that becomes a whole category of debate that, an agent has to figure out what it means and has to think about all the different ways that could go badly for the author. The publisher has to frame it in such a way that it's going to protect them not just now, but in the future.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why ebooks was so hard for publishers were some publishers had clauses in their contracts that said, we're going to publish this in print, but also in any future formats, which then rolled digital in. And some just said, we're going to publish this in print, and we're also going to publish it in audiobook, and didn't say anything else. And they
Yeah.
had to go back and
Yeah.
get like explicit rights to digital work. So they're always thinking about it from that point of view of not just the AI of today, but I'm writing a contract for the AI of 10 years from now, and I have to figure that out too. So before, call it 2024, publisher contracts typically said this needs to be an original work, quote unquote original. And there can't be any third party authorship that's undisclosed. If you worked
Mhm.
with somebody else, tell us. You used a ghostwriter, tell us.
Yep.
Wasn't any mention of AI. And that creates the opening for authors to say, AI isn't a contributor here. It's just a tool that I use.
Yeah. Spell check.
Yeah, yeah. Spell check plus. Spell
Yeah.
check plus maybe it added some words, like
Yeah.
paragraphs of words. So to plug that hole, many contracts are now apparently requiring that you disclose any AI generated or AI assisted content and may sometimes even be asking which tools were used. Some people are asking for thresholds, saying things like no AI generated text, beyond like minor use,
Mhm.
without consent or without disclosure. And what that's trying to do is frame AI up as if you don't tell us about it and we find out about it later, that's a breach.
Right.
And then we have the right just not to publish the book and maybe do other stuff too. So that disclosure piece is one part of it. The other is a redefinition of authorship because the author in a contract used to kind of just be the person who was submitting the manuscript.
Mhm.
And your ghostwriters, your editors, or anybody else you use only mattered if they were formally credited. Otherwise, like the contracts between you and the publisher, and you're the author, you're the one handing over the manuscript. How you got there, as long as you tell us how you did it, is really your own business.
Yeah. You own your own sausage factory.
Yeah, yeah. And now what we're hearing about is contracts that increasingly define the work as you created this, right? Like, it's not you and a machine. It's not you and your robot friend. And
Yeah.
if it is, we want to hear everything about it so that AI output is being looked at much more like a third party contributor or another category that requires permission. But definitely it can't be invisible. It's
Yeah.
something, you have to talk about it much more like you talk about a ghostwriter. So you've got that as a second part. The third is authors used to have to say, like, give warranties about certain things in the book themselves. They had to say it was
Mhm.
original. They had to say there was no plagiarism. They had to say there was no like infringement of other copyrights. And, and now publishers are starting to add in warranties around AI generated material. Um, and often because like, they don't know whether then we've got to find out if the AI infringed someone's copyright or did
Well,
they,
I mean, that was
yeah.
the next level I was going to go to was like, so if a research assistant, a ghostwriter is a person, an independent person, you can have your own terms with them. I paid my research assistant. I paid them $1,000 and they gave me this many hours of work and that's what they did. And we're good. And that was their arrangement.
Mhm.
But if I have the output of a tool that is owned by a whole other corporation that has created content and is sneaking into my book. There's this Ouroboros thing going on here, and
Well, I think what publishers are looking for is trying to solve some of the same challenges that we're trying to solve as a retailer, which
yeah,
is we don't know if we can detect it 100% of the time. We're going to ask you to give us full transparency on how this book got made.
yeah,
And that means if something shows up in the process that's going to embarrass us in the future, or that makes it clear that this book wasn't substantively written by a human to a degree that we care or think we
hmm,
will care in the future, then we have the right to walk away.
yeah,
Um, and maybe get our money back. Like who knows? The um, the other side of this is that then you have agents pushing back as well. So the while you have publishers asking for all of this disclosure, agents are like, well, tell us about your editorial process. Are
mm,
you going to be using AI tools on my manuscript? Are you going to be putting this manuscript into a repository that is going to be inspected by, or, that's going to be using AI? I want to make sure that this manuscript doesn't get used as training data on any
yeah,
of the deals that you have. So we're getting both a bit of tit for tat and
yeah,
also some legitimate concerns on the side of authors saying, for all that you're asking us about AI, you're also using it and you talk about using it publicly. And we know that the big publishers are doing deals with the various LLMs for different purposes. AI is working its way into different parts of the editorial process or the copywriting process or the proofreading process. So, hey, publisher, tell me about where your stuff is going to be used. Disclose where the tools are going to be used in the editorial process. Tell me how data is going to be stored and used. Are you going to warrant that my book isn't going to get put into a pot with a whole bunch of other books? So that's happening on the other side. And then you have the retailers, and we're all
yep,
saying, hey, publishers, we want to know whether these books are coming from AI. So we kind of like look at it's not just a AI written book got through and then got withdrawn.
hmm,
It's like a snapshot of this industry starting to grapple with these issues using the tools that they have as best they can. And what's fascinating about it to me is that it's it's coming for traditional publishing and independent publishing and the reader space all at the same time.
hmm,
You've got indie authors are just as worried, are in many cases more worried about getting buried underneath thousands and thousands of AI generated books. Um, and they're getting hit by that much faster and harder than authors going through the traditional publishing process. But the publishers are on the receiving end of all of those books and have reputational risk if they let them through. So
yeah,
they have to figure it out. And what makes publishing in some ways one of the first industries to go through this particular wood chipper is that LLMs are really good at generating text.
it's language.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so, of course, that goes in one direction, which is things like software development. The most structured form of text there is computer code. So, the most predictable text you could make is text that's meant to talk to a computer, which is why Claude Code and all of the B2B applications for AI are exploding as fast as they are. And there's
hmm,
lots of money there and lots of kind of human capital tied up in it, and software development's really expensive.
yeah,
The other natural place you can go is other places where people pay for words. That's
yeah,
the other fast place you can monetize it. And it's not something that the AI companies themselves are going to do because actually in the grand scheme of things there's not that much money in it, but it
yeah,
empowers lots of little actors and individual authors to say, hey, maybe I could, write a book or a whole bunch of books using this tool much more quickly and much more easily than I did before. And push those into platforms like ours, like Amazon's, or hey, like I think I've got a pretty good idea for this. Could I get this all the way into a traditional publisher and get like a real book deal? We're crashing into that right now.
Yeah.
And everybody's has these defenses that they've built up just for the regular management of the tide of incoming writing that comes from authors and and publishers. But all of those defenses are creaking because now words are being produced at an industrial scale without a person behind them. We had a certain amount of that in the past. You'd see
Yeah.
people copy and paste books together and then try to submit them. But now the machines are so automated, it can be thousands of books a day, it can be hundreds of
Yeah.
thousands of books a day. And none of the filters that we have are really well designed for that.
Yeah. I'm out of questions. Is there anything you wanted me to ask you before I draw it to a close?
No, I think that's it. Um I think the fascinating thing from here on in, we can kind of wait for two things. One is um watching how publishers decide to brand themselves in the face of AI. Like, are people going to put their hands up and say, we are a human publisher for human readers with human authors?
Hmm.
And is that going to become part of their identity that we're out here curating the best of what people writing have to offer?
Yeah.
Um, and then I think the other shoe that everyone's waiting to drop is at some point a book going to make it through the publishing process, end up on the bestseller list, and then the author puts their hand up and says, listen, I prompted this thing into existence. This is a machine-made book.
Well, so we called that in October 2024.
Yeah.
You called that kind of the AI Sally Rooney.
Hmm.
That they'd already be out there. We'd already be celebrating the voice of a generation, and then we would discover that voice was created with the help of NVIDIA graphics
Yeah.
cards.
And and here we are, it's 2026, hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
And and if we look at the AI generated writing that's coming through, like it's got a long way to go. But
Yeah.
Shy Girl shows us how close you can get. You can have books on the shelves.
Yeah. Yeah. You can finish
And
the novel. You
yeah.
can the whole thing. Yeah.
And I think the other existential crisis that's happening inside publishers in general is, let's face it, like editing has often become a much lighter touch than it used to be. We
Yeah.
like to believe that every author sits down and grinds through every paragraph with the author and they're back and forth on sentence structure and they're doing these big substantive edits. But sometimes it's like, hey, this book has already been written. I'm giving this a light pass through and I'm making sure the grammar's okay, and out it goes. And the more of that happens, the more likely it is for AI Sally Rooney or AI Tom Clancy or whoever it's going to be to like get out the front door. And I think that's making publishers think a lot about, hey, what do we want our editors to do?
Yeah.
And what responsibility are we putting on them in the acquisition process to make sure that they're not picking a book that was half written by a machine? And again, we don't know that that's the case with Shy Girl. We actually don't know how much of Shy Girl is written by
Yeah.
AI. The challenge that all of these detectors have is that their false positive, false negative is actually pretty high.
Yeah.
And so somebody saying this book is 70% written by AI is, is also likely to say that Moby Dick is 30% written by AI. Like that's
Yeah.
that's part of the challenge.
Yeah.
So nobody can rely on tools for 100% accuracy. It seems like no one can rely on an individual editor's eyes on to be 100% certain of what comes through and what can't. The only thing I saw that was really interesting was an MIT study that came out just a little while ago talking about who was better at detecting AI written text,
Hmm.
humans versus machines. Like an untrained human was less good than an AI detecting piece of software at determining whether a passage was written by AI or not. A person who has spent time working with AI And reading AI text and seeing what the LLMs generate was better than any of the detecting software at detecting AI generated text.
Mm,
So, like a human's ability to detect sort of soft patterns and, and odd structuring and phrasing, if they knew what to look for and were familiar with the habits and ticks and patterns that AI has,
yeah.
was better than any software that had been trained to do that specific purpose. And where that goes is I think we have a lot of publishers right now who, and a lot of individual editors who are saying, I don't want anything to do with that stuff, keep me as far away from it as possible. I'm about the books and the words and the author and nothing else. And yet they're becoming familiar with that could be the very thing that prevents them from letting another book like this get through
Yeah.
because it requires a certain level of familiarity to detect in the first place.
Yeah.
And those are all the issues I think that publishers are starting to wrestle with right now. And it's an uncomfortable time because it calls all of these different roles and all of these different traditions about how a book gets published into question.
I I wonder, as you say, um, editing has become such a light touch thing, and it is to the detriment of books. Like we've all read books that, you know, like, why am I bored now? I was enjoying this in the first
Yeah.
half. Well, like literally that's the editor's job to like be sensitive to themselves as a reader and go, I'm bored here. I need
Hmm.
to work with the author on fixing this. And I wonder and I hope that the fire hose of AI slop incentivizes, as you said earlier, like a publisher now has this incentive to build a reputation around quality because quantity is so solved. Quantity is beyond human scope at this point. So it would be nice to hear from that there's no more solid reassurance that something's not machine generated. Then the editor can say, I have worked this manuscript over with this author for so long. uh Look, if it's AI generated, then it's the deepest of deep fakes because we have worked this thing.
Or it's the best AI generated text I could possibly have input into.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
So hopefully good books come out the other end of this at the end, when it's all done.
that is the goal.
Well, by the time this episode goes out, hopefully it won't already be out of date in the wake of yet another AI scandal tearing apart everyone's summer reading plans. But if you want to know more about this, we're going to put a bunch of links in the show notes. All the stuff we talked about will be there. Links to the Shawn Michaels episode, links to where we made the bet about the 20% odds is what Michael gave it. 20% odds of the AI Sally Rooney. I didn't force him to time box that, so you won't find it on Polymarket. We can't pay out on that one.
I would take one side of that bet though.
You
I'm just saying.
sure?
Yeah.
That's it. So if anybody can tell us where to Kalshi or Polymart, where can we push some chips in?
And just to be clear, I don't think it's going to be Sally Rooney first. I think it will be someone else.
Yeah,
I'm only calling it AI Sally Rooney. Sally Rooney, I think you're going to be just fine.
yeah. Sally Rooney's gonna be, yeah, exactly. We can trust Sally Rooney.
Can we?
Can we? This has been Book Talking on Kobo and Conversation with me, Nathan Maharaj.
And me, Michael Tamblyn.
We're going to be back soon with more interviews with amazing authors, real ones, swear to God. So if you're not already following the show in whatever podcast player you're using right now, we strongly recommend hitting that button so you don't miss what we've got coming up. Thank you for listening.